The forest went silent. Not the kind of quiet that came with nightfall or snow. This was the silence that happened when every living thing decided simultaneously that being noticed was a death sentence. Nyx Rowan's hand froze halfway to the chipped ceramic mug on the table. Water still dripped from the ceiling into a rusted bucket in the corner. Plunk, plunk, plunk. Each drop impossibly loud now that the birds had stopped singing. She counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The floorboards didn't creak when she moved. She'd spent 2 years learning which planks could hold weight without sound, which corners of this rotting hut would betray her with a groan. The door was 6 steps away. The window to her left had no glass, just a frame covered with layered plastic sheeting that rattled when the wind picked up. No wind now. The plastic hung completely still. Nyx pressed her spine against the far wall, eyes locked on the door she'd reinforced with scrap metal and hope. The lock was a joke. Anyone who wanted in could kick it down in seconds. But the door wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to buy her 30 seconds to run. Hi viewers, have you ever had that gut feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong? Did you listen to it or ignore it? Her suppressants were wearing off early. She could feel the heat starting to build at the base of her spine, that crawling sensation that meant her body was about to become a beacon for every alpha within a 10-mile radius. The pills were supposed to last another week. They'd cost her 3 months of saved rations. Someone had sold her fake medication. Or someone had sold her location. The wolves appeared first. 3 of them materialized from the fog like they'd been sculpted from smoke and muscle. Massive. Disciplined. They didn't circle the hut or sniff the air like wild animals hunting. They positioned themselves with military precision. 1 at the door, 2 flanking the sides. These weren't predators. These were escorts. Nyx's throat closed. Her fingers found the knife she kept tucked against her lower back. The blade she'd sharpened every morning for 2 years and never had to use. The handle was warm from her body heat. Her palm was slick with sweat. The alphas stepped into the clearing. Triplets. The air pressure changed. That's what it felt like when alphas like these moved through space. Like the atmosphere itself had to rearrange to make room for them. They wore dark leather and fur despite the mild temperature. Their long hair pulled back from faces that could have been carved from the same block of stone. Identical, terrifying in their synchronization. They stopped 10 feet from her door. Nyx's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Triplet alphas weren't random. They didn't just wander through forests looking for rogue omegas hiding in condemned shelters. Triplet alphas were government assets, political tools, the kind of weapons councils deployed when they wanted control without fingerprints. One of them tilted his head slightly, nostrils flaring. He knew she was inside. Of course he knew. The knock came slow and controlled. 3 measured strikes against wood that should have splintered under that kind of strength. "We're not here to mark you." The voice carried through the door like it had been designed to sound reasonable. Calm. Almost kind. "We're here because the system finally noticed you exist." Nyx's knees went liquid. Not the words themselves, though those were bad enough. It was the way he said system, like it was a living thing, like it had eyes and memory and patience. She'd run from a model pack 3 years ago. Clean uniforms, public smiling. Alphas who spoke about progress and protection on camera and discussed Omega heat cycles like maintenance schedules behind closed doors. She remembered standing in a hallway, half hidden, listening to 2 ranking members debate whether her biology was worth the administrative overhead. That's when she learned the truth no one said out loud. Cruelty didn't need violence. It only needed paperwork. Nyx Rowan. A different voice now. Deeper. "We know you're listening. We know you've been off-grid for 34 months. We know you've been buying suppressants from an unlicensed dealer in the border towns." Her breakfast threatened to come back up. "We also know," the third voice added, quieter than the others, almost gentle, "that you're running out of options." The plastic sheeting over the window moved. Not from wind, from displacement. One of the wolves had circled around back. Nyx forced air into her lungs. Her vision tunneled. The knife in her hand felt like a child's toy now, useless against what stood outside. She could run. There was a loose board in the back corner that led to a crawl space, then the forest. She'd mapped 17 different escape routes. But if they'd found her here, they'd already mapped those routes too. The council has implemented new compliance measures. The first alpha again. His tone never shifted from that maddening calm. Updated Omega safety protocols. Tracking systems designed to prevent exploitation. Exploitation. The word landed like a fist to the sternum. They weren't here to drag her back in chains. That would be visible. Messy. Someone might ask questions. They were here to offer her a choice that wasn't a choice at all. We're authorized to relocate you to a secure facility. Medical oversight. Anonymity protection. No forced bonding. No immediate registration. He paused. You'll be safe. Nyx's laugh came out strangled and sharp. Safe. She'd heard that word before. She'd watched it get written into contracts and policies right before Omegas started disappearing into voluntary rehabilitation programs they never left. You have 12 hours to decide, the second alpha said. After that, the offer becomes a mandate. The wolves shifted positions. The one at the door sat, waiting. Nyx stared at the knife in her hand, at the water still dripping into the bucket, at the walls of this hut that had kept her hidden and alive and slowly driving her insane with isolation. She'd survived by understanding patterns, by watching systems operate when they thought no one was paying attention. And every system she'd ever seen had one rule it never broke. Once you were inside, you never got out without permission. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. How did you find me? Silence. Then, almost apologetically, someone who cared about you filed a missing persons report. They were worried. The knife clattered to the floor. Because that was the thing about chains. Sometimes the people who loved you were the ones who locked them in place. What happens when the people trying to save you are the ones you're running from? Drop a comment below. The hut smelled like wet earth and rust and the particular kind of decay that came from would forgetting what it meant to be a tree. Nyx sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, counting the grain patterns in the planks she'd stared at for 738 days. The alphas hadn't left. She could hear them outside. Not talking, not moving, just existing with the kind of patience that came from knowing the outcome was inevitable. The wolves had settled into resting positions. One of them yawned. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd learned to read systems the way some people learn to read faces. Patterns. Rhythms. The space between what was said and what was meant. It started in the model pack, back when she still believed transparency was the same thing as truth. They'd had weekly wellness checks, mandatory counseling, health monitoring presented as concern instead of surveillance. The Omega coordinator had been a beta woman named Mrs. Duchamps with soft eyes and softer voice who explained that tracking heat cycles was just responsible pack management. We want to make sure you're supported, she'd said, filling out forms on a tablet. That you have what you need when your biology becomes challenging. Biology, like it was a disease. Like needing heat partners was a symptom instead of nature. Nyx had nodded, smiled, signed the releases. 3 months later she'd been in that hallway, hiding behind a storage door that didn't close all the way, listening. Her cycles irregular, creates scheduling conflicts. Can we adjust her suppressant dosage? Already maxed out. Any higher and we risk permanent damage. So what's the recommendation? Pause. Papers shuffling. Suggest transfer to the regional center. They have better facilities for difficult cases. Difficult cases. Not people. Cases. That night Nyx had pulled her file from the pack records. It took her 40 minutes to bypass the lock on the administration office and another 20 to find the cabinet marked Omega Services. Her hands had trembled then too, but from rage instead of fear. Transferred. 6. Relocated. 4. Voluntary commitment. 9. 19 Omegas in 3 years. All listed as successful integrations. None of them had come back. She'd left before dawn. No goodbye. No confrontation. Just walked into winter with borrowed clothes and enough suppressants to last 6 months if she rationed carefully. The forest had swallowed her whole. And for 2 years, she'd convinced herself that disappearing was the same thing as winning. A knock pulled her back to the present. Different this time, softer, almost apologetic. "We brought supplies. The third alpha, the quiet one. Water, food, medical kit. We're leaving them by the door." Nyx didn't move. "We're not trying to starve you into compliance," he continued. "That would defeat the purpose. The purpose, like she was a project. A problem with a solution that just needed the right approach." She heard something set down on the wooden planks outside. Footsteps retreating. The wolves didn't move. Her stomach cramped. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. The water in her jug was getting low, and the creek was a 15-minute walk through exposed terrain. She'd been rationing, planning to make a supply run after dark. But after dark was when alphas hunted best. The window plastic rustled. Nyx's head snapped toward the sound, but it was just wind returning now. Tentative, like the forest was testing whether it was safe to breathe again. She thought about the alphas outside. Triplets, born together, raised together, probably trained together. The kind of bond that made them move like a single organism with 3 bodies. Councils loved triplets because they were efficient, predictable. Their loyalty to each other meant they'd never question orders as long as those orders didn't threaten the unit. Perfect tools, but tools still needed handlers. "Why you?" Nyx called out. Her voice sounded strange after hours of silence. "Why send 3 alphas for 1 omega?" The quiet one answered. "Because you're smart, and smart omegas require different protocols." Different protocols. She filed that away. "Because running away from a model pack raises questions," the second voice added. "Questions the council would prefer to answer privately." Privately, she filed that away too. "And because," the first alpha said, 17 other omegas have gone off-grid in the last 18 months. You're not an isolated case anymore. You're a pattern." The floor dropped out from under her. 17 omegas had done what she did. 17 people had looked at the system and decided the forest was safer. 17 separate decisions that added up to something the council couldn't ignore. That's what this was. Not rescue, not even enforcement. Damage control. What happened to them? Nyx's throat was dry. The other 17. Silence stretched out like a held breath. 14 agreed to relocation, the quiet alpha finally said. "They're in processing now." "And the other 3? More silence. "Then, the other 3 are why we need you to choose relocation. Before someone chooses something worse for you." Nyx's fingernails dug into her palms. Before someone chooses something worse. Not if. Before. Like violence was just waiting for the paperwork to clear. She crawled to the window and peeled back one corner of the plastic. The 3 alphas stood in a loose triangle formation, their backs to her door, facing outward, protecting, no, containing. The wolves watched the tree line with ears forward and bodies relaxed. Not on alert, on standby. One of the alphas shifted his weight and the other 2 adjusted their positions in response. Synchronized, unconscious, the kind of coordination that came from shared instinct instead of training. Nyx had read about triplet bonds in the pack library, how they shared sensory input sometimes, how their emotional states could bleed into each other, how separating them caused physical pain. She wondered if they knew what it felt like to be alone. She wondered if they'd ever had to choose between survival and self. The quiet alpha turned his head slightly, not enough to look at the window, but enough that she knew he knew she was watching. 12 hours, he said. Then we have to report your decision. Whether you've made one or not. The plastic fell back into place. Nyx slid down the wall until she was sitting again. The supplies outside the door might as well have been on another continent. Opening that door meant acknowledgement, meant stepping into a negotiation she'd already lost. But staying inside meant starving on principle. And the system didn't care about principle. It only cared about compliance. Her eyes landed on the loose board in the corner. Her emergency exit. Her last resort escape route that would dump her into a crawlspace barely wide enough for her shoulders. Then out into the forest where the wolves were probably already positioned. She'd mapped 17 routes. They'd only needed to map one. Because that was the difference between surviving and winning. Survivors reacted. Winners controlled the field. And Nyx Rowan had been surviving for so long she'd forgotten what control felt like. When every choice is a trap, do you pick the cage you know or the one you don't? Comment your thoughts. The alpha standing directly in front of her door had a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Nyx could see it now that she'd finally opened the door. Just a crack, just enough to prove she was still breathing and capable of making decisions. The supplies sat on the wooden planks in a neat pile. Military-grade water bottles. Protein bars that probably tasted like cardboard but would keep her alive. A medical kit with the seal still intact. No locks, no strings attached. Just resources placed at the feet of someone who desperately needed them. The scarred alpha didn't turn around. "Take what you need," he said. "We'll wait." Nyx's hand shot out, grabbed the closest water bottle, and retreated like she'd stolen something. The door slammed shut. Her heart was trying to punch through her ribcage. She twisted the cap off and drank without breathing. The water was cold, clean. Nothing like the creek water she'd been boiling and filtering through old coffee grounds and moss. Her body responded with a gratitude that felt like betrayal. Outside, she heard low voices. Not whispering. They weren't trying to hide their conversation. Just speaking at a volume that assumed she was listening. "She's scared. The quiet one. She should be. The scarred one. That's not helpful, Bastian." A third voice, slightly higher. Younger maybe. "Bastian." She filed the name away. "Neither is pretending this is a rescue, Orrik." Bastian's tone carried an edge now. She ran from a model pack. That means she's seen how this works. Lying to her won't build trust. "I'm not suggesting we lie, Orrik. I'm suggesting we don't terrify her into doing something desperate. She's already desperate. That's why we're here." The third alpha, the quiet one, hadn't spoken yet. Nyx pressed her ear against the door crack. "Valeer." Orrik's voice dropped. "You're the one who read her file. What do you think?" Silence. Then, "I think she's the smartest person in this clearing. And I think she knows exactly what we're offering." Nyx's blood turned cold. "Which is why," Valeer continued, "she hasn't run yet. She's calculating." The water bottle crinkled in her grip. He was right. She had been calculating. 3 alphas, 3 wolves, unknown backup protocols. Heat suppressants failing. No allies, no resources, no leverage except the one thing they seemed to want, her voluntary compliance. Voluntary. That word was doing a lot of heavy lifting. She opened the door wider this time. All 3 alphas turned. Up close they were somehow worse. Not because they were threatening, though the sheer size of them suggested violence was always an option, but because they looked concerned. Like they actually cared whether she ate today or collapsed from dehydration. That's what made good tools dangerous. When they believed in their purpose. "You said 17 others went off-grid." Nyx's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Why me specifically? Why send 3 council alphas for?" She gestured at herself. At the hut. At the life she'd built from desperation and spite. "This?" Bastian and Orrik exchanged a glance. Some silent communication passed between them. Valeer stepped forward. He was the one without visible scars. His face was smoother. Younger, but his eyes were older than they should have been. "Because you kept records," he said simply. The world tilted. "We don't know what's in them," Valeer continued. "We don't know where you hid them. But the council knows you documented your time in the model pack. And they know that if you disappear completely, if you become a tragedy instead of a relocation, those records might surface in ways they can't control." Nyx's lungs forgot how to work. She'd kept records. Audio fragments captured on an old phone during wellness checks. Screenshots of transfer logs. Notes written in cipher on the inside covers of pack library books. She'd hidden them in 3 separate locations and told herself it was just insurance. Just something to prove she'd existed if things went wrong. She'd never planned to use them, but the council didn't know that. So this isn't about my safety. Her laugh came out jagged. This is about containing a potential PR problem. Both can be true, Orrik said quietly. No, Nyx shook her head. No, they really can't. Either you're here because I matter or you're here because I'm inconvenient. You don't get to pretend those are the same thing. Bastian's jaw tightened. We're here because 14 other Omegas are sitting in relocation facilities right now wondering if they made the right choice. We're here because 3 more are still out there, and if something happens to them, their blood is on our hands. We're here because the system is broken and fixing it requires keeping people alive long enough to change it. Fixing it. Nyx's voice went flat. You think relocation facilities are a fix? I think they're better than dying alone in the woods. Bastian shot back. That's not an answer. That's a threat wearing concern like a costume. The wolves stirred. One of them stood, ears forward, focused on Nyx with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Valeer raised one hand slightly. The wolf sat. You're right, Valeer said. This is damage control. The council wants you contained. They want your records buried. They want the narrative controlled. He paused. But we're not the council. You work for them. We work adjacent to them. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Valeer's expression didn't change. Then let me make the difference clear. If we report back that you refused relocation, the council will send someone else. Someone who doesn't care about records or narratives or keeping you breathing. Someone who understands that problems can be solved quietly if you have the right resources and no moral objections. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. They'll send a cleaner, Orrik added softly. Not an escort team. A cleaner. Nyx had heard about cleaners. Everyone had. The alphas who handled situations that needed to disappear. The ones who specialized in making Omegas into cautionary tales whispered around fires. Rogue Omega found dead. Exposure. Animal attack. Such a tragedy. Should have accepted help when it was offered. So my choices are relocation or murder. Her voice barely qualified as sound. Your choices, Valeer said carefully, are coming with us to a facility where you'll have medical care, legal protection, and time to figure out your next move. Or staying here and hoping we can delay the council's timeline long enough for you to run somewhere we won't find you again. That's not a choice. That's a hostage negotiation. Yes, the honesty landed like a punch. Bastian was watching her with something that might have been respect or might have been calculation. Orrik looked miserable. Valeer looked like he was waiting for her to finish a math problem he'd already solved. How long? Nyx asked. How long do I have before they send someone else? 72 hours after we file our report, Valeer said. 96 if we claim complications. For days. Maybe 5 if they lied for her. Nyx looked at the hut behind her. At the moss claiming the corners and the roof sagging under its own weight and the water dripping into the bucket like a countdown clock. She'd survived here, but surviving wasn't the same as living. And living required choices that weren't just picking which cage had better lighting. If I go with you, Nyx said slowly, do I get to keep the records? All 3 alphas went very still. That's not, Orrik started. Non-negotiable, Nyx interrupted. If you want me to walk into that facility voluntarily, if you want me to pretend this is protection instead of containment, then I keep the records. All of them, and you don't ask where they are. Bastian's hand curled into a fist. The council will never agree to that. Then I guess they'd better send someone convincing to change my mind. Nyx smiled without humor. Or they can send a cleaner and explain to the media why a missing Omega turned up dead 3 days after a council escort team located her. Valeer's eyes narrowed. Then, impossibly, he smiled. She's good, he murmured to the others. She's insane, Bastian muttered. No, Orrik said quietly. She's survived this long by being smarter than the people hunting her. We should have expected this. Valeer stepped closer to the door, close enough that Nyx could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. close enough that her failing suppressants registered his scent. Cedar and smoke and something sharper underneath. "Keep your records," he said, "but understand that keeping them makes you dangerous. And dangerous omegas get monitored more carefully than compliant ones. I'd rather be dangerous than disappeared." "Fair enough." Valeer extended his hand. Not demanding, offering. 72 hours. "That's how long we can give you at the facility before the council starts asking questions we can't deflect. Use that time however you need to." Nyx stared at his hand. At the calluses that suggested violence was familiar. At the steadiness that suggested control was habitual. She didn't take it. "I'll pack," she said instead. "Give me 10 minutes." She closed the door on 3 alphas and 3 wolves, and every instinct screaming that she was about to make the worst decision of her life. But at least this time, she was choosing the cage herself. Sometimes the only power you have is deciding who holds the key. What would you do? Drop your answer below. Nyx owned exactly 17 things worth carrying. The emergency bag had been packed for 2 years, always ready, always within reach, never needed until now. Spare clothes rolled tight. Fire starter wrapped in plastic. The knife with the worn handle. 3 protein bars she'd been saving for winter. A water filter that probably didn't work anymore but felt too important to leave behind. And the phone. Dead for 18 months. No charger. No service even if she could power it on. But the audio files were still there, locked behind a password only she knew, containing conversations that proved wellness checks were interrogations and consent forms were contracts written in invisible ink. She shoved it into the bottom of the bag. The hut looked smaller from inside the doorway. 2 years of survival compressed into rotting wood and determination. She genuinely believed she could outlast the system by hiding, by becoming invisible. But systems didn't forget. They just waited for you to get tired of running. Nyx slung the bag over her shoulder and opened the door. The alphas had moved. Bastian stood near the tree line, speaking into a radio in clipped sentences. Orrik was checking supplies, redistributing weight between packs with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Valeer was exactly where she'd left him, watching the door like he'd known precisely how long she'd take. The wolves were gone. "Where?" Nyx started. "Scouting the route," Valeer said. "Making sure we're not walking into complications." Complications. She was learning their language. Complications meant other alphas. Rival packs. Council oversight they hadn't anticipated. Bastian finished his radio conversation and crossed back to the group. His expression was carved from stone. "Transport's waiting 2 miles north," he said. "We need to move before the weather shifts." Nyx glanced at the sky. Clear. Bright. No hint of incoming storms. Orrik caught her look. Not that kind of weather. Political weather. She filed that away too. They moved in formation. Bastian leading, Orrik bringing up the rear, Valeer positioned beside Nyx like a shadow. Not touching. Not crowding. Just there. Always there. The forest felt different with them in it. Louder somehow. Their footsteps were barely audible, but their presence was deafening. Trees seemed to lean away. Birds went silent as they passed. This was what power looked like when it moved through space. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. "Can I ask you something?" Nyx kept her voice low. Valeer glanced at her. "You can ask. The 14 omegas in relocation facilities. Are they okay?" His jaw tightened. "Define okay. Are they alive? Are they safe? Are they—" She struggled for the right word. "Are they themselves?" Valeer was quiet for so long Nyx thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 12 are doing well. Adjusting. Participating in programs. Making plans. And the other 2? One is on medical hold. Suppressant complications. And the second? Valeer's hand flexed at his side. "The second keeps asking when she can leave." Nyx's stomach clenched. "What do you tell her?" "Nothing. I'm not assigned to internal monitoring." "That's not an answer." "No," Valeer agreed. "It's not." They walked in silence after that. The forest thinned gradually, old growth giving way to younger trees. dense canopy opening to patches of sky. Nyx had never come this far north. Too exposed. Too close to the routes transport vehicles used. Bastian raised one hand. Everyone stopped. A low whistle echoed through the trees. Short, sharp, specific. Bastian whistled back. Different pattern. The wolves materialized from the underbrush like they'd been made from shadow and intent. One of them carried something in its mouth. Fabric. Dark red. Bastian took it, examined it, and his expression went carefully blank. What is it? Orrik moved closer. Omega scent marker. Bastian held up what Nyx now recognized as a torn piece of clothing. Fresh. Maybe 6 hours old. The bottom dropped out of her world. One of the three? Orrik's voice had lost all warmth. Can't tell yet. Wrong wind direction. Bastian looked at Valeer. We need to report this. We report this and the council pulls us off escort duty, Valeer said flatly. Reassigns us to tracker teams. We don't report this and another Omega dies because we prioritized one mission over. I know what it means. Valeer's tone could have cut glass. Nyx watched them fracture in real time. Bastian rigid with protocol. Valeer calculating angles. Orrik caught in the middle looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Where? Nyx interrupted. Where did you find it? All three alphas turned to her. Half-mile west, Bastian said carefully. Near the old supply road. That's not off-grid territory. That's monitored zone. Exactly. Bastian's eyes narrowed. Which means either someone got sloppy or someone got desperate. Or someone got hunted, Nyx didn't say. How long until transport? She asked instead. 20 minutes if we maintain pace, Orrik said. And if you investigate the marker? Hour. Maybe 2. Bastian crossed his arms. Why? Because Nyx understood patterns. Because systems operated on precedent. Because if an Omega had been caught or killed this close to monitored zones, it meant the rules were changing faster than anyone had briefed these three. Because if you don't investigate, Nyx said slowly, and that Omega dies, you'll spend the rest of your lives wondering if you could have prevented it. And if you do investigate and I run while you're distracted, you'll have to explain to the council how you lost your primary objective. She watched understanding move across their faces like weather. So what are you suggesting? Valeer's voice was soft. Dangerous. I'm suggesting, Nyx said, that we're all trapped in the same impossible situation. You want to save everyone. I want to survive. The council wants control. And none of those things can happen simultaneously. Bastian stepped closer. If you run. I know. Cleaners. I remember the threat. It's not a threat. It's a guarantee. Then it seems like you'd better make a choice. Nyx met his eyes. Because standing here debating is how people die while committees argue about jurisdiction. The radio on Bastian's belt crackled. A voice cut through static, calm, professional, absolutely devoid of humanity. Escort Team 7. Status update required. Confirm package secured. Package. They were calling her a package. Bastian grabbed the radio. His thumb hovered over the transmit button. Valeer caught his wrist. Don't, Valeer said quietly. We have protocols. Protocols wrote the system she ran from. Valeer's grip didn't loosen. Protocols transferred 19 Omegas and pretended it was support. Protocols are why we're standing in a forest trying to convince someone that captivity is kindness. Bastian's hand shook. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the problem isn't the Omegas who run. Maybe it's the system that makes running feel like the only option. The radio crackled again. Escort Team 7. Respond. Orrik was staring at both of them like he'd never seen them before. Nyx held her breath. Bastian pressed the transmit button. Team 7 responding. Minor delay due to terrain complications. Package secure. ETA revised to 45 minutes. He released the button. Silence. Then, acknowledged. Council expects full debrief upon arrival. The radio went quiet. Bastian turned to Nyx. We have 45 minutes. If we're investigating that marker, we do it fast and we do it together. You run, this deal evaporates. Understood. Nyx nodded. And if we find someone? Orrik asked. No one answered that, because they all knew what finding someone meant. Either they'd find an Omega who needed help and blow their timeline trying to save 2 people instead of 1. Or they'd find proof that the Council's definition of acceptable losses had just expanded. Valeer started walking west, toward the marker, toward whatever waited in monitored territory. 43 minutes now, he called back. Bastian cursed under his breath and followed. Orrik looked at Nyx. Stay close. If this goes wrong. I know, Nyx said. Cleaners. No. Orrik's expression was bleak. If this goes wrong, cleaners are the least of our problems. They moved through the forest like ghosts chasing ghosts, hunting evidence of something everyone already knew but no one was allowed to prove. And Nyx realized with horrible clarity that she wasn't the only one trapped. These alphas, trained, bonded, weaponized, were just tools in a system that had convinced them servitude was purpose. The question was whether they'd figured that out yet, or whether she'd have to show them. Trust is a luxury when survival is the cost. Who would you trust in Nyx's position? Comment below. The scent marker had been tied to a branch at eye level. Not dropped. Not lost. Deliberately placed. Nyx watched Valeer examine it with hands that didn't shake despite what they both knew it meant. The fabric was cotton. Dark red, wine-colored, maybe. The edges were torn, not cut. Ripped in a hurry or ripped in a fight. The Omega who'd left it had wanted to be found, or wanted someone to know they'd been there. No blood, Valeer murmured. He brought the fabric close to his face, inhaling deeply. His expression went carefully neutral. Heat scent, active, maybe 12 hours old. 12 hours meant she'd been in heat when she left it. Vulnerable, desperate, broadcasting her location to every alpha within miles whether she wanted to or not. Any secondary sense? Bastian stood 3 feet away, scanning the surrounding area with movements so controlled they looked mechanical. Rain, diesel fuel, fear. Valeer lowered the fabric. And something chemical, medical grade, could be suppress. He stopped. Nyx's blood turned to ice. Could be what? Suppressants that were tampered with. Valeer's voice had gone flat. Dead. There's a compound smell underneath. Synthetic. Wrong. The same wrongness Nyx had been feeling in her own medication. The early heat cycles. The unpredictable spikes. Someone was flooding the black market with sabotaged suppressants. Why? The word ripped out of Nyx before she could stop it. Why would anyone? Because Omegas who can't control their heat cycles get flagged for medical intervention, Orrik said quietly. He'd moved to the base of the tree, examining the ground. Intervention means registration. Registration means tracking. Tracking means profit, Bastian finished. His jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. Heat scent attracts alphas. Alphas pay councils for supervised bonding contracts. Councils profit from administrative fees. Nyx thought she might vomit. This wasn't incompetence. This was design. Weaponize biology. Create dependency. Monetize desperation. How many? Her voice barely qualified as sound. How many Omegas have been dosed with fake suppressants? We don't know, Valeer said. Guess. His eyes met hers. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The forest spun. Nyx had thought she was smart, thought she'd escaped by being cleverer than the system. But she hadn't escaped anything. She'd been herded, managed, pushed toward desperation so complete that relocation would look like rescue. And she'd almost been grateful for it. The council knows. It wasn't a question. Some of them know, Bastian said carefully. Others suspect. Most don't ask questions because the revenue stream keeps their territories funded. And you? Nyx turned on him. What do you do with this information? Bastian's expression could have been carved from stone. We follow orders. We relocate Omegas. We file reports. We trust that someone above our clearance level is handling the bigger picture. That's not an answer. No, it's survival. Bastian's voice carried an edge now. You think we like this? You think we don't see what's happening? We're weapons, Nyx, tools. We do what we're designed to do, or we get discarded like every other broken piece of equipment the Council doesn't need anymore. So you just comply. Nyx's laugh came out jagged. You just keep relocating Omegas into a system you know is corrupt because what? Because refusing would be inconvenient? Because refusing would be suicide? Orrik snapped. You think you're the only one who's powerless here? We're bonded. Triplet alphas don't exist outside Council oversight. We can't take independent contracts, can't own property, can't even cross territorial lines without authorization. We're assets, government property. One wrong move and they separate us. The word separate hit like a physical blow. Nyx had read about forced separation, how it destroyed triplet bonds, how the alphas who survived it came out hollow, obedient, useful. Valeer was watching her with eyes that held too much understanding. We're all trapped in the same machine, just different parts of the mechanism. That doesn't make it okay. No, Valeer agreed. It makes it sustainable. A whistle cut through the conversation, low and urgent. One of the wolves had found something. They moved as a unit, Nyx included now whether she wanted to be or not. The wolf stood 20 yards away near a drainage culvert half hidden by overgrowth. It wasn't growling, wasn't aggressive. It was mourning. Nyx saw the body before her brain could process what she was seeing. Female, young, maybe early 20s, curled on her side in the mud like she'd fallen asleep and never woken up. Her clothes were torn. Her feet were bare and bleeding. Her face was turned toward the sky with eyes open and empty. No visible wounds. No signs of violence. Just stillness where life used to be. Exposure, Bastian said. His voice had lost all inflection. Heat cycle burned through her reserves. Dehydration. Hypothermia. Classic off-grid fatality. Classic. Like this happened so often it had a category. Nyx couldn't look away. The dead Omega's hand was outstretched, fingers curled around nothing, reaching for help that never came. She's one of the three, Orrik said quietly. Kira Dupree, 23, went off-grid 4 months ago after her pack tried to force-bond her to an alpha she'd never met. She left the marker, Valeer added. Probably realized she was dying. Wanted someone to know she'd tried. Tried to survive. Tried to escape. Tried to exist outside a system that treated her like inventory. And she died alone in the mud reaching for a rescue that was never coming. Nyx's knees hit the ground. This could have been her. Would have been her if the triplets had arrived 3 days later. If her suppressants had failed completely. If the forest had been less forgiving or the winter more brutal. Kira Dupree had made the same choice Nyx made. Run or submit. Forest or facility. She'd chosen the forest. And the forest had killed her. We need to report this. Bastian was already pulling out his radio. Wait. Valeer's hand shot out. Think about what reporting this means. It means an Omega is dead and the Council needs to. The Council needs to do what, exactly? Valeer's voice was sharp now. Launch an investigation? Issue new safety protocols? They'll write a report. File it under acceptable losses. And use her death as justification for more aggressive retrieval operations. So we just leave her here? Orrik sounded broken. No. We document. We photograph. We collect evidence. Valeer crouched next to the body with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his size and strength. And we add it to the pile of things we can't fix yet but refuse to forget. Yet, that word carried weight. Nyx watched Valeer close Kira's eyes with careful fingers. Watched him arrange her body with dignity she hadn't been afforded in life. Watched him take photos on a device that wasn't connected to any official network. You're building a case, Nyx said. Valeer didn't look up. I'm documenting a pattern. Against the Council? Against the system that makes death preferable to compliance. Bastian had gone very still. That's sedition. That's evidence. Valeer stood. And evidence only matters if someone's brave enough to use it. The air pressure changed. Nyx could feel the triplet bond stretching, Bastian pulling toward protocol, Valeer pulling toward rebellion, Orrik caught in the middle trying to hold them together. "We have 20 minutes until transport," Orrik said carefully. 15 if we want to maintain the timeline we reported. Then we move. Bastian's voice carried finality. "We take Nyx to the facility. We file our standard report. We request reassignment to tracker teams and hope someone else finds Kira before scavengers do." "No." Nyx heard herself speak before she'd decided to. "No, that's not what happens." 3 pairs of eyes locked on her. "We take evidence," Nyx continued. "Photos, location data, fabric samples, everything. And we don't report it to the council. We hold it. Add it to whatever documentation you're already collecting. And when there's enough, when the pattern becomes undeniable, we make it public." "That would destroy us," Bastian said flatly. "Good. Destroy yourself before the system does it for you." Nyx stood. "You said your weapons, tools, government property. Fine. Be sharp enough to cut the hand that wields you." Silence. Then Valeer laughed, sharp and startled and utterly humorless. "She's right," he said. "She's insane," Bastian shot back. "She's survived longer than Kira did using nothing but intelligence and spite." Valeer gestured at the body. "That's our future if we keep following orders. Useful until we're not. Buried quietly. Forgotten systematically." The radio crackled. "Escort Team 7, 10-minute warning. Transport standing by." Bastian grabbed it, looked at Valeer, at Orrik, Nyx, at Kira Dupree, dead in the mud with her hand outstretched. He pressed transmit. "Team 7 responding. Minor complications resolved. Package secure and en route. ETA 8 minutes." He released the button. "We document everything," he said quietly. "We get Nyx to the facility. We request time to debrief." And then he stopped, started again. "And then we decide what kind of tools we want to be." Valeer was already collecting samples. Orrik pulled out a camera. Nyx stood over Kira Dupree's body and made a promise the dead couldn't hear. "Your death won't be acceptable. Your loss won't be filed away. Your choice won't be forgotten. Because if running was fatal and staying was captivity, then the only option left was burning the whole system down. Sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. Would you risk everything to expose the truth? Let me know below." The facility didn't look like a prison. That was the first warning sign. Clean white walls. Soft lighting that mimicked natural daylight. Furniture arranged to suggest comfort instead of containment. The intake coordinator, a beta woman named Ms. Trask with a smile that never reached her eyes, handed Nyx a tablet loaded with forms. "Just standard processing," Ms. Trask said. "Medical history, dietary preferences, emergency contacts." Emergency contacts. Nyx almost laughed. Who exactly was she supposed to list? The hut that was probably already being demolished? The forest that had kept her secrets? She scanned the first form. Consent to medical examination. Consent to psychological evaluation. Consent to location monitoring for safety purposes. Temporary, the fine print said. Subject to review. No end date listed. Nyx's pen hovered over the signature line. Behind Ms. Trask, through a window that was definitely reinforced glass despite its decorative frame, she could see other Omegas moving through a courtyard. Talking, laughing even. They looked healthy, clean, safe. They also looked watched. Security cameras positioned every 15 feet. Staff members stationed at every exit wearing uniforms that were just professional enough to hide the fact that they were guards. Motion sensors disguised as smoke detectors. Is there a problem? Ms. Trask's smile tightened. How many Omegas are here? Nyx asked. Currently? 43. We have capacity for 60. And how many have left? The smile froze completely. Left. Completed the program. Relocated elsewhere. Went home. Ms. Trask's fingers drummed once against her desk. Our residents transition when they're ready. The timeline varies based on individual needs. That wasn't an answer. That was a script. Nyx signed the forms. What choice did she have? Kira Dupree was still lying in the woods because she'd chosen differently. Excellent. Ms. Trask collected the tablet. You'll be in Wing C. Shared accommodations initially, then private quarters once you've completed orientation. Shared with who? Another recent arrival. Lovely girl. Very cooperative. Cooperative. The word landed like a threat. Miss Trask led her through hallways that curved just enough to disorient. Left, right, another left. Nyx tried to memorize the route, but the identical doors and uniform lighting made everything blur together. They stopped at room C17. Inside, a young woman sat on one of two narrow beds, braiding her hair with mechanical precision. She looked up when the door opened. Her smile was bright and empty. "Hi, I'm Shanice. You must be my new roommate, Ms." Trask left without another word. The lock clicked. Electronic, Nyx realized. No keyhole. No manual override. Shanice was still smiling. "Don't worry, you get used to the doors. It's for our safety. There was an incident last month. An Omega tried to leave during her heat cycle. Very dangerous. The locks keep us protected." Protected. That word again. Nyx sat on the empty bed. The mattress was too soft. "How long have you been here?" "For months. It's been amazing. 3 meals a day. Medical care. Counseling sessions. I feel so much better than I did before." "Before what?" Shanice's smile flickered. "Before I understood that running was just fear talking. The counselors helped me see that accepting help isn't weakness." The words sounded rehearsed. Recited. "Have you tried to leave?" Nyx asked carefully. "Why would I want to leave? Everything I need is here." "But if you wanted to, could you?" Shanice's hands stilled in her hair. For just a moment, something real flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe, or the ghost of whatever person she'd been 4 months ago. Then the smile returned. "The program works best when you trust the process. You'll see." That night, Nyx lay awake listening to Shanice's breathing even out into sleep. The room had no windows, no clock, just the soft hum of ventilation and the occasional footstep in the hallway outside. She thought about Kira reaching for help that never came. She thought about the triplets documenting evidence they might never use. She thought about the forms she'd signed and the doors that locked from the outside and the cameras that never blinked. And she realized with horrible clarity that she'd traded one cage for another. The only difference was this one had better lighting. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. Voices murmured low, professional, discussing someone the way you discuss inventory. Nyx pressed her ear against the wall. Flagged for extended evaluation. Previous pack reported non-compliance issues. Recommendation. Increase monitoring. Standard protocol for high-risk cases. Her blood turned cold. They were talking about her. When safety looks like surveillance, how do you know when to stop trusting the people who claim to protect you? Drop your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Share this story if it resonates, and let's keep this conversation going in the comments. Breakfast was served at 7:30 sharp in a dining hall that tried too hard to feel welcoming. Nyx counted exits. 3 visible. All monitored. All staffed. She took her tray. Eggs that were somehow both overcooked and runny. Toast that tasted like cardboard. Coffee that was mostly water, and found a table near the back. Observation position. Wall behind her. Clear sight lines to every door. Old habits. Shanice waved from across the room, surrounded by other Omegas who all had that same bright emptiness in their eyes. Nyx didn't wave back. A woman slid into the seat across from her. Older, maybe late 30s. Her hair was shot through with gray and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee. "You're new." "Not a question." "Yesterday," Nyx said. "I'm Octavia. Been here 11 months. She took a sip of terrible coffee without flinching. "Let me guess. They told you it was temporary. Told you it was for your safety. Told you you could leave when you were ready." Nyx's pulse kicked up. "Yes. Did they mention that Ready is determined by a review board that meets quarterly and hasn't approved a single departure request in 18 months? The eggs turned to ash in Nyx's mouth. Octavia leaned forward. Her voice dropped. Did they mention that the medication they give you isn't just suppressants? That it includes mood stabilizers and compliance enhancers that make you forget why you wanted to leave in the first place? How do you? Because I was a nurse before I came here. Because I still remember enough chemistry to recognize what they're putting in the daily vitamins they make us take. Octavia's smile was sharp and bitter. Because some of us are still fighting even when it looks like we've given up. A staff member walked past. Octavia's expression smoothed into pleasant neutrality until they'd moved on. How many? Nyx whispered. How many of us are still? 5 that I know of. Maybe more. Hard to tell who's pretending and who's actually been broken. Broken. The word hit like a fist. We need to get out, Nyx said. No exits without authorization. Electronic locks on every door. Perimeter fencing disguised as decorative landscaping. Security protocols that track every omega every hour of every day. Octavia's hands curled around her coffee mug. We're not in a facility. We're in a laboratory. And we're the experiment. Across the room, Shanice laughed at something one of the staff members said. Bright, empty, perfectly compliant. That could be Nyx in 4 months. In 6. In however long it took for the medication and isolation and constant monitoring to erase the parts of her that knew how to resist. The triplets who brought me, Nyx said carefully. Bastian, Orrik, Valeer. They were collecting evidence. Building a case. Octavia's eyes sharpened. Against the facility? Against the whole system. Evidence doesn't matter if no one sees it. And no one sees anything that happens inside these walls. Octavia glanced around, lowered her voice even further. But if you have contacts outside, if those alphas actually care, I don't know if they do, then we find out. Because if they're documenting what's happening, they need proof from inside. Octavia pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket. Transfer logs. Names of Omegas who came here and disappeared from records entirely. I've been keeping track. Nyx took the paper. 18 names. Dates. Notes written in tiny, cramped handwriting. Where did they go? That's the question nobody answers. Octavia stood. Mandatory counseling session in 10 minutes. Act normal. Smile when they ask how you're adjusting. And whatever you do, don't refuse the vitamins. She walked away before Nyx could respond. The counseling session was worse than expected. Dr. Chun was professionally warm and relentlessly invasive. She asked about Nyx's childhood, her previous pack, her reasons for going off-grid. She nodded at all the right moments, made sympathetic sounds, wrote notes on a tablet Nyx couldn't see. Running is a trauma response, Dr. Chun said gently. Your brain was trying to protect you from perceived danger. But now you're safe. Now you can begin healing. Perceived danger. Like the system that had evaluated her as overhead wasn't real. Like the transfers and disappearances were paranoia instead of pattern. What happens after healing? Nyx asked. After, Dr. Chun smiled. After, you'll have options. Reintegration programs. Supervised bonding if you choose. Community placement. The goal is to help you build a life where you feel secure. Can I leave before then? If I wanted to. The smile never wavered. Of course. But we'd want to ensure you're stable first. That your decisions come from health rather than fear. Translation. No. That evening, Nyx palmed the vitamin instead of swallowing it. Tucked it under her tongue until she could spit it into the toilet. Her hands shook the entire time. In the darkness of room C-17, she listened to Shanice's even breathing and thought about 18 missing Omegas and triplet alphas who might be building a case or might be building false hope. The lock on the door was electronic. But electronics could be compromised. And Nyx Rowan had spent 2 years learning how to survive impossible situations. When the cure looks like poison, who do you trust to tell the difference? Comment below and hit subscribe. This story is just getting started. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. and share your thoughts to keep this movement going. The triplets came back on day 6. Nyx was in the courtyard pretending to read when she saw them through the reinforced glass. Bastian spoke with the facility director, a man Nyx had never seen who wore expensive suits and a smile that suggested consequences. Orrik and Valeer stood slightly behind, silent and alert. They didn't look at the Omegas. That was intentional. Had to be. Ms. Trask appeared at Nyx's shoulder. "You have visitors. Please come with me." Not a request. The meeting room was small and aggressively neutral. Beige walls. A table. For chairs. A camera in the corner that wasn't even trying to hide. Bastian sat across from her. Orrik and Valeer flanked the door. "How are you adjusting?" Bastian's voice was professional. Empty. Nyx understood immediately. Performance. They were being recorded. "Fine," she said carefully. "Everyone's been very helpful. Any concerns we should be aware of?" "No concerns." Bastian's jaw tightened fractionally. "We're required to conduct a welfare check. Confirm you're receiving appropriate care." Nyx met his eyes, tried to communicate everything she couldn't say out loud. The locks, the medication, the missing Omegas, the way Shanice had stopped being a person and started being a script. "I'm receiving excellent care," she said. Something flickered across Bastian's face. Understanding maybe, or frustration. Valeer shifted his weight. His hand moved to his pocket, pulled out a phone, set it on the table like he was just checking the time. But the screen was facing Nyx, and on that screen, for exactly 3 seconds before he pocketed it again, was a message. "Hold on. Working on it." Her breath caught. "Is there anything you need?" Orrik asked. His tone was gentle, almost apologetic. "No," Nyx said. Then quieter, "Just time." Valeer's eyes narrowed fractionally. Message received. The meeting lasted exactly 8 minutes. Professional. Documented. Useless to anyone listening. But as they stood to leave, Bastian paused. "The Council appreciates your cooperation. Compliance makes everything easier." Compliance. The word everyone kept using like it was kindness. "I understand," Nyx said. She did. More than they knew. That night, Octavia slipped her another piece of paper during dinner. More names. More dates. And at the bottom, barely legible. They opened an investigation. External audit scheduled. Nyx's heart hammered. An audit meant oversight. Questions. Potential exposure. It also meant the facility would be cleaning house. Hiding evidence. Making sure everything looked perfect when inspectors arrived. Making sure problematic Omegas disappeared before they could talk. 2 days later, Shanice was transferred. No warning. No explanation. Just gone when Nyx woke up. Her bed stripped. Her belongings removed like she'd never existed. "Shanice completed her program," Ms. Trask said when Nyx asked. "She's been placed with a community pack. A success story." But Octavia's eyes said different when they passed in the hallway. Another name for the list. The audit happened on day 12. Professional people in professional clothes asking professional questions that didn't scratch the surface. They toured the facility, reviewed documentation, spoke with carefully selected Omegas who smiled and praised the care they'd received. They didn't ask about Shanice. They didn't ask about the 18 names on Octavia's list. They didn't ask about electronic locks or compliance medication or why no one had successfully left in 18 months. They signed their reports and left. That evening, Nyx was called to Dr. Chen's office. "We've noticed some concerning behaviors," Dr. Chen said. Her smile was still warm, still empty. Resistance to medication, isolation from peer groups, questions about program structure. Nyx's blood turned cold. "We think you'd benefit from a more intensive treatment track. Specialized care." Specialized. The word the facility used right before Omegas disappeared. "I'm fine," Nyx said. "I'll try harder. This isn't about effort. It's about your well-being." Dr. Chun made a note on her tablet. "Transfer is scheduled for tomorrow morning. You'll be much more comfortable in the specialized wing." The specialized wing no one ever saw. No one ever talked about. No one ever came back from. Nyx smiled with teeth that wanted to bite. Thank you for caring. She walked back to her room on legs that barely held her weight. Octavia was waiting in the hallway. Her face was ashen. They're moving you, she whispered. Tomorrow. Then we're out of time. Octavia pressed something into Nyx's hand. Small. Metal. A key card. Maintenance access. 3rd floor. Eastern stairwell. I've been stealing duplicates for months. Where does it go? Sub-basement. Old server room. They haven't updated security there yet. There's a delivery entrance. And then what? Octavia's smile was broken and brave. Then you run. And you make sure those triplets use whatever evidence they're collecting. You make sure what's happening here gets exposed. Come with me. Can't. They're watching me too closely. Octavia gripped Nyx's shoulders. But you can make it. You're smart enough. Angry enough. Scared enough to survive. What about the others? If you expose this place, we all get out. One way or another. Sometimes escape isn't selfish. It's the only way to save everyone else. What would you risk to expose the truth? Comment below, subscribe for the conclusion, and turn on notifications. This story ends soon, but your voice keeps it alive. Share it. The specialized wing was on the 4th floor. Nyx knew because she'd been escorted past it once during her 2nd day. The doors were heavier there, the windows smaller, the silence absolute. No one made noise in the specialized wing, because no one was left who remembered how. Midnight came with the mechanical click of automated door locks cycling through their nightly routine. 30 seconds of vulnerability while the system refreshed. Octavia had timed it obsessively. Nyx counted to 15. Pressed Octavia's stolen keycard against the reader. The lock disengaged with a soft beep that sounded like thunder. The hallway was empty. Cameras swept in predictable patterns, 15 seconds per rotation. She'd memorized the rhythm. Move, freeze, move, freeze. The eastern stairwell door was marked maintenance only. The keycard worked again. The stairwell smelled like industrial cleaner and old concrete. Down. 3 flights. Every footstep echoing despite her careful placement. The sub-basement was exactly as Octavia described. Old server racks humming with forgotten data. Exposed pipes. Dim emergency. Lighting that cast everything in sickly green. And the delivery entrance. Steel door. Pushbar exit. Alarmed, obviously. But alarms meant attention. Attention meant questions. Questions meant audit committees might actually have to acknowledge something was wrong. Nyx shoved the door open. Sirens screamed into the night. She ran. The perimeter fence was 8 feet of decorative iron that was absolutely climbable if you were desperate enough. Nyx's hands bled on the spikes at the top. Her shoulder wrenched when she dropped to the other side. Didn't matter. Behind her, lights flooded the facility grounds. Voices shouted. Dogs barked. She ran harder. The forest was a quarter-mile away. Exposed ground. No cover. Security vehicles would be mobilizing. Drones probably already airborne. Her lungs burned. Her vision tunneled. Almost there. Almost. Headlights cut across the field. Nyx dropped into a drainage ditch, pressing herself into mud and darkness. The vehicle passed close enough that she could hear the radio chatter. Perimeter breach. Omega female. High priority retrieval. High priority. Not safety concern. Not welfare check. Retrieval. Like she was property. The vehicle moved on. Nyx counted to 30 and kept running. The forest swallowed her whole. She didn't stop until her legs gave out 2 miles in. Collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip bark. Her phone. The dead phone she'd kept for its audio files was still tucked against her spine. Useless. No power. No signal. No proof except the words she could speak and the records that might not matter. Dawn came gray and cold. Nyx heard the wolves before she saw them. 3 shapes materializing from morning fog with the precision of designed violence. Then the triplets. Bastian looked furious. Orrik looked relieved. Valeer looked like he'd expected this exact outcome. "You ran," Bastian said flatly. "I escaped." "Semantics. You violated your relocation agreement. You triggered a facility-wide security event. She did exactly what she needed to do," Valeer interrupted. He held up a tablet, which was "Give us grounds for an emergency investigation. Omega welfare concern. Possible containment protocol violations. We've got authority now." Nyx's heart stuttered. "Investigation into what?" "Everything." Orrik crouched beside her. "The missing Omegas. The medication. The transfers that don't go anywhere. We've been building documentation for weeks. Your escape gives us legal justification to demand full facility records." "They'll bury it," Nyx said. "They'll destroy evidence. They'll try," Bastian agreed. "But we're not the only ones watching anymore. Your friend Octavia? She's been feeding information to 3 separate advocacy groups. Press contacts, legal networks, everything you two documented." Octavia. Brave, brilliant Octavia who'd stayed behind so Nyx could run. "Is she safe?" Valeer said. "For now. The audit team is back. Real investigators this time. People who ask the right questions. And if they don't find anything?" Bastian's expression went hard. "Then we leak what we have anyway. Let public pressure do what official channels won't." Nyx looked at these 3 alphas who'd been tools and were choosing to become weapons turned against their wielders. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk everything?" Valeer met her eyes. "Because Kira Dupree died reaching for help. Because you ran twice rather than accept safety that looked like surrender. Because tools can choose to break." The radio on Bastian's belt crackled. "Recovery team to base. Package located. Returning with full escort." Package. Still. Always. But this time, Bastian didn't correct them. He just smiled. When the system breaks, who decides what gets built in its place? Drop a comment, subscribe for the finale, and turn notifications on. We're almost there. Share this journey. The facility closed 6 months later. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Just a quiet administrative decision buried in council meeting minutes and regional budget allocations. Omegas were transferred to different programs. Staff were reassigned. The building was repurposed for general medical use. No one was charged with crimes. No one was held accountable. But everyone knew. Because Octavia's documentation had reached the right people at the right time. Because investigative journalists had asked questions councils couldn't deflect. Because public pressure had made continuing the program more expensive than shutting it down. The system didn't fall. It adapted. New oversight committees. Updated safety protocols. Transparency initiatives that sounded meaningful on paper and remained invisible in practice. Nyx watched it happen from a distance. She never went back to the hut. That person, the one who'd thought hiding was winning, didn't exist anymore. She lived quietly now. Small apartment, part-time work, suppressants purchased from legitimate sources with legitimate prescriptions. She attended advocacy group meetings sometimes, spoke when asked, mostly listened. Octavia sent letters, careful, coded. They'd both learned that visibility was a double-edged weapon. The triplets had been reassigned, separated despite their bond. Bastian to policy review, Orrik to training oversight, Valeer to nowhere anyone could track. Punishment disguised as promotion. Tools that got sharp enough to cut both ways didn't stay in service long. Nyx thought about them sometimes, wondered if they'd survive their defiance, wondered if breaking free of purpose had broken them entirely. She'd never asked them to sacrifice their bond for her freedom, but they'd done it anyway, and that mattered. Because not every protector deserved forgiveness, but these 3 had earned acknowledgement. On the first anniversary of Kira Dupree's death, Nyx walked into the forest. Not to hide, not to run, just to remember. The hut was gone, demolished, reclaimed by moss and roots and indifference. She stood where the door used to be and spoke to ghosts. You tried. It mattered. Someone remembered. The forest didn't answer, but it didn't need to, because Nyx Rowan was still unmarked, still unclaimed, still surviving on her own terms in a system that wanted her cataloged and controlled. And that was victory enough. For now, somewhere in a council archive, flagged files still carried her name. Somewhere in policy databases, algorithms still tracked Omegas who went missing. Somewhere in medical supply chains, sabotaged suppressants still circulated. The system had adapted, but it hadn't forgotten, and neither had she, because the fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. And Nyx Rowan had learned something the system hadn't anticipated. Survivors made terrible victims, and women who'd escaped twice wouldn't hesitate to burn everything down if pushed a third time. The story continues. The system evolves. And somewhere, Nyx Rowan is still walking unmarked through a world that insists she should be claimed. The end is just another beginning. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and refuse to look away. Turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Comment with your thoughts. Your voice matters in this conversation. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for refusing to accept that survival is the best we deserve.